Hey, this is Todd from Copyflight. Um, doing a quick little video about something I call the REO Framework. I've thrown it around a few times on social media, and everybody's always like, "What are you talking about?" And one of the things is like 2 years ago, I started this blog post called REO Framework for better content, for good content, whatever. And I never finished it. It got hung up. A lot of things were going on in 2 years, so um, it kind of came back to me, and I thought, well, I'll do a little video to go through this, and it kind of has helped me maybe possibly jumpstart the blog post, which I hope to have done shortly, maybe in the next few weeks. Cross your fingers. And so I thought I would sit down and do a little slideshow, a little video talking about what the REO framework is. And as you can see here on this slide, it is for better content. So it's REO framework for better content. So there is a problem with content in 2022. It actually existed for a while. We're basically overrun with content, right? There's so much content out there. There is, it's a crowd. It's at least a crowded field. There's loads and loads of content, and I'm not just talking about articles, blog, written content. It's everything from podcasts to video to, um, you know, to actual written content to ebooks to there's just a ton of it. And because of that, there's too much competition, and people tend to pay attention to the best content. Another issue that exists here and now is that SEO is changing dramatically, actually, has changed dramatically. So, some of the things you'll hear SEO experts talk about is the expertise, authority, and trust that Google Webmaster Tools talks about, having the whole EAT, user intent. There's a whole lot of other things that really matter. But one thing that does matter also, in fact, it might be the most important thing, is what might be said as quality content. Now, you do have the EAT is really kind of a factor of ranking, if you will. That these are not really external; they're kind of internal things, but it depends on three things that you might or might not have going for you. Um, so the question asks, what is quality content? Well, um, that is something we could do a whole book about. I have asked and I have read and I've looked and I've seen there are lots of opinions about quality content, what that is. So quality content will be something that meets a certain standard of excellence, and those standards are different from person to person, honestly. Um, and this content that stands out while maintaining those same standards. So a lot of things you'll see be done well. Uh, Unfortunately, people pay attention to things that maybe aren't quite as important anymore, like word count. Is your content 2,500 words or more? Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't, but there are certainly many cases of articles that are way less words than that rank really well. And then that doesn't account for actual web pages, which often don't have that many pages on it. Um, so, what I have done with the REO framework is used it to kind of fill in the gaps of some areas where people maybe miss on quality content. And not only that, these are things that you can execute every time. So I want to take a look at this tweet by Ross Simmons, who runs Foundation Inc. And so we talk about what is quality content, what is content that stands out, and he gives an example of some things, and I think they're worth noting. One, do what most people would avoid. Um, Create something that is hard to replicate. Three, execute an idea that makes you a bit nervous. Four, study the marketing strategies of some of the greats. And actually, if you follow Ross and Foundation Inc., they're always doing a deep dive into some content strategy, some marketing strategy, actually, not content marketing, really, of a company who's done a great job. And then the last one, which seems kind of counterintuitive in this stage and age, is stop relying on keyboard tools for all your content ideas. And I agree with that. I've actually not been using keyword tools for that for a long time. I think in terms of topics and topic clusters mostly, but also thinking types of articles. And I have this whole thing that I call, I have a word for it, and I'm actually drawing a blank right now, but it's this, you know, at the meta level, these are the types of articles that you can do. And there's lots of ways to bring to your front types of things to write about. And another thing that Ross would say that I would agree with, and I think makes things easier, instead of writing 5 articles a week, write one really good one and then repurpose it into various pieces of micro content, things that would go into a podcast or on a video, at a slideshow that you might put on LinkedIn, all kinds of things. And they do a great job of talking about that. It's an area that I struggle with because, well, I kind of handle my own thing, and so I'm doing good to do a video like this. But I want to get into what the REO framework is, and I think these will be 3 hallmarks, 3 things you can use as a guideline for creating quality content. Are there other things? Sure, there's other things. You're going to probably somebody's going to listen to and argue with me and say, "Well, you need to include this or include this." I'm not saying this is an exhaustive list. This is something that helps me remember to do these 3 things. That if I'm missing these things, there's a huge gap in the content that I'm creating. And I originally was writing this about blog posts and articles, but let me tell you, you can it translates to any kind of content you're creating. Sometimes I think it's easier, especially for me, to put this into an article because that is the thing that I do the most, kind of old hat, if you will. But when you start talking about blog posts and videos, and I do video show on YouTube, those kinds of things. These are the things you want to try to do, um, regardless. So let's dive into what the REO framework is. One, R stands for relevant. You want relevant content. E stands for engaging, and O stands for original. Let's talk about each one of these. R is for relevant. I was actually looking through the blog post that I started writing. I actually wrote some pretty good stuff about this, but um, there are 3 things you need to be relevant. One is you need to know your audience, right? You need to know your content must be something that is relatable to your target audience. So you need to know your target audience, not just know them, but know what their needs are, what their desires are, what motivates them, if you will. I'm not talking about demographics, more of psychographics. I believe in using, when you're doing persona research, using the jobs to be done framework. This is not my area of expertise, but if you want to know more about that, I urge you to find Adrienne Barnes on Twitter. She is the person who does the best. Well, the person I know who does the best content. Another thing you can dive into is get a copy of Finding the Right Message by Jennifer Havis. You can get a paperback or ebook for that. And so she talks about doing the things that's the last on this list, which is interviews and research. There's got to be this interview. You may need, the best way you need to do is interview your customer to learn what these things are. Now, let me back up here. If you're maybe a software provider or something like that, you may not know this instinctively. You may actually have to interview them. You may have to do surveys to ask the questions to get the answer. But when you're in a service business, this is something that I find interesting. Now, I'm going to use my friend Scott, who runs a coffee shop in town that I go to. I always like Scott. I like to use him as an example of someone who knows their audience. As soon as people walk in, he greets them by name. Why? He knows them, and he knows what they order. Now, this is something that's not near as important as maybe your product management tool or whatever it is you're using. It's just a cup of coffee in the morning, but there's more to it than that. I go in, I like to tell them I go in to see a friendly face, which is the truth. I go in to see a friendly face. I do love their coffee. Their coffee is my favorite coffee in town. But in addition to that, there is the sense of a belonging when I walk in, believe it or not. They call me by name. Half the people in the coffee shop when I go in are someone I know or know of. So there's a real sense of belonging there, which is not exactly the highest form of sexual self actualization that a person can have, but he knows what people want, what they're looking for. I come in and I say, Scott, I'm having problems with sinuses today. I need one of your teas. He takes care of it. Um, Service industries are a lot like that. For instance, last year we had water damage, and I got a person I know uh, locally to come and clean that up. He does this all the time. We had a need. We had water damage, and the need was pressing. You got to get it cleaned out. You got to get rid of the mold, and you got to throw out everything that's infected to get it back to where you can rebuild it. Um, there's not anything fancy about that. That needs the same. Now, there are things that go along with this, right? They need to trust the person who's coming in their house to do the work. There's all these other peripheral things that matter. Service industries often know their clients very well because they work with them one on one. They meet them face to face. It's a different dynamic than maybe a software company. Regardless, that you need to know your audience. You need to know what the motivators are for them to buy, what problems they're trying to solve, and one of the things I like to say is you need to know their story. I think service industry people know the story because they have done the kinds of things to close a sale, which is face to face meeting and those kinds of things. If you are a an agency or your software provider, you often have to do a little bit extra work to do that. That's where your interviews and research comes in. I'm not going to go into that, but it is about being relevant. So you can create content that meets those needs, those desires, those things that they are really just being stressed about. And it may be directly tied to your business. It may be something that is on the outside of your circle of your business that they need help with. So, number one in the REO framework is be relevant. Number two, E stands for engaging. Content needs to be engaging. And if you go back to the first one, which is relevant, the first rule of engagement is being relevant because if it's not relevant, then it's not engaging. So well, I don't have that on this list here. You've got to be relevant because there's nothing more boring than sitting through a presentation or reading something that's not relevant to you. And so that's where you start. You're hoping that it's relevant. There are three things I like to talk about to help your content be more engaging. First is create a hook. You're creating interest, basically. And when you look at a blog post, I like to talk about the introduction. Introductions can be really short, they can be very unengaging, but don't do that. Create a hook, create an interest. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You see it in the movie industry. One of my favorite examples is the first Deadpool movie. Um, and this is an example of what a lot of people do in movies. The Deadpool movie starts in the middle of the climactic battle and you see all this stuff going on and it's crazy what's going on, and then the story goes backwards to fill you in up to that point. That is something a lot of people do. Another thing that you'll see in movies a lot of times is some kind of catastrophic event, some kind of something that sets the story in motion. But whatever you do, you want to create that interest. That could have come in your headline, and it also comes in your introduction. So you want to try your best to be engaging by creating a hook, creating that interest. Another thing you can do is give examples. And by doing that, we talk about them as analogies, but also telling a story. And I love to use storytelling for my examples because, frankly, there is a little bit of a gap between our right and left brain, right? And one side does pretty well with abstract, and the other side not. And a point is often very abstract, and sometimes we need to fill that gap by putting a story or analogy that helps bridge that gap. And that's what a story does. And this is not, something, I mean, it's actually it's a scientific thing that you create that gap with a story. So abstract thoughts some people are very good at that. Most people are not. Even those that are good sometimes can benefit from having something that helps um, give an example of the abstract point you're making. And the last thing for engaging is specificity. I had a hard time spelling that word. I have a hard time saying that word. But the ideal is to be specific. The more vague and the more broad you are, um, the less likely people are to feel engaged. It just you're kind of wondering, is this about me? Is this something I relate to? Whatever. So let me give you an example. When I was in college, I had this English composition teacher. When I wrote um, essays for her, she would say, Dr. Mickoff, she'd say, now, Todd, I think you need to be a little more specific. And it was something I always struggle with. I still struggle with trying to be specific. But specificity kind of brings the picture into clarity, if you will. If you're broad and vague, then it loses its engagement. The O for the REO framework is original. Now, when I use this, I'm not talking about plagiarism. However, never, 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 ever, ever do that. Don't plagiarize, period. That's a given. Um, but people will plagiarize, and that's not what I'm talking about here, but don't do that. So I put out 4 points to kind of help us understand the idea of being original in your content. Um, when it comes to a topic that's been written about, you take a topic like, let's say, digital marketing, which is a very broad topic, really. 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been broad, but it is now. Um, Probably been written about in as many ways as you can possibly come up with. But when I mean being original, I mean don't write the article the way your favorite writer wrote it. I'm talking about finding a different angle. That is not easy to do, but it is doable. And frankly, people who come from the journalism industry are very good at finding a different angle for an existing topic. So you can learn something from some of your friends in journalism. Some have actually crossed over into content marketing, and they are very good for this, finding a different angle for an existing topic. This is something that people who write really well do. When you do content, um, finding a different angle can give your content originality. Another thing you can do, original study. Usually, what people do is they will find a study. Sometimes they're not really the best studies, but they'll find a study. Actually, what you'll find a lot is people will link to an article that talks about a study, which is linked to another article that talks about the study, and link to another article that talked about the study, and then link to another article that actually links to the study. So sometimes it's really hard to actually link to the study. When I'm using a study or information from a study, an article, I try to go get the original source. Um, so, first of all, if you're writing about a study, go to the original source and cite that. But I find original study, creating your own resource, your own study, is a very original thing to do. And so I actually did that for a client last year. I said, well, nobody's doing this right now, so let's do it. I did it. Um, we created a study for a particular industry and got some data out of it. And it prompted somebody else to do the same thing. And so create original study. Now you say that's hard to do. Absolutely, it's hard to do. Remember what Ross said? Do something that's hard to replicate. Absolutely. You do something. I have seen companies actually write books. I have at least 2 books on my shelf that were more or less lead generation magnets. Um, People don't generally write a book as uh, an original piece of work as a lead magnet. And I'm not saying it should be a lead magnet, but if you write a book, it gives you certain kind of credibility, especially if it's about a topic that you're in the industry in which you're in. So, um, have original study, write a book, something no one else does in your industry. And so I can see a lot of things that can be done in your industry that no one else does, especially if they do boring content. There's a lot of ways to go with that, but it just takes some outside the box thinking. If you're watching what other people are doing and you're doing that, and that's all you're doing, then you're going to keep doing that. You're going to be copying, continue to copy what somebody else is doing, but you could do something totally different. What happens when you do something totally different? It gets attention and you're a little nervous, right? You put that out in the open. It's like it's a little bit nervous. That's something else that Ross talked about. If you're putting it out and you're just a little bit nervous about it, I have done that. Um, so it makes it's nervous, but it always garners interest and people like it. Um, can like it. It can be a welcome piece of content for your audience. And then the last thing, and it actually goes into what I just said, create something entertaining. Be creative. Um, we feel like sometimes we always have to do this boring content. We got to write blog posts. We got to pump out the blog posts. And well, what about doing something different? What about doing a piece of creative work? It's original. It's different. I can guarantee you, probably no one in your industry is doing that. So, um, create something that's entertaining because, frankly, you're fighting for people's attention. And if you can have something entertaining, and then kind of sneak in some point or topic, um, then that's fine too. So, the O from the REO framework is be original. Find a way to use originality. So, just to recap, the REO framework: relevant, be relevant, know your audience, know what their needs and motivations are, and their all that kind of thing, their problems, pain points. Be engaging. Don't be afraid to use storytelling, and just be sure that you are basically bridging that gap between the abstract and the non-abstract. And then original, be original. And there's lots of ways to be original. Do something different. Think outside the box. It's going to make you nervous, but do it anyway. So that is my little video for you today. And if you want to know more, I am Todd Jones, and I am the founder of Copyflight. And there's a lot of things we like to do, but basically help companies simplify their message, make it easier to understand, know what to write on their website. I'm a content creator, a storyteller, and a digital marketer. A few years ago, I discovered the power of storytelling, and I never looked back. Ever since I used strategic storytelling to help companies with their messaging. So I have a show called Messaging Matters on YouTube, which you're welcome to find on the Copyflight channel. And I talk about uh, how your message matters for your company. So thanks for watching today. I appreciate it. And if you've watched this video, be sure to tweet at me at TE Jones and say, hey, thanks for the video, or I got some feedback for you, or whatever. Appreciate it.